colleges are only obligated legally to provide access, not success, right? And so think about the students and the parents of those students who are coming out of that environment where everything has been about how to help my child or how to help me be successful. And now I'm on a college campus and you're saying that all you really have to do for me is provide me the kind of fair and equitable access to these opportunities, and then I'm on my own. And so, that idea of the cliff is really just crucial. And so we see a lot of students crash and burn in their first year because they are so unprepared for it.
Hello and welcome to Student Affairs Now, the online learning community for student affairs educators. I am your host, Heather Shea. Today, we are discussing how we can better meet the needs of autistic and neurodivergent students on college campuses. I am joined by several scholars and practitioners and the executive director of the College Autism Network. Before I introduce my guest today, I'm going to share a little bit more about our podcast and today's sponsors. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We hope you find these conversations make a contribution to the field and are restorative to our profession. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays, and you can find us at studentaffairsnow.com on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Today's episode is sponsored by Simplicity. A true partner, Simplicity supports all aspects of student life with technology platforms that empower institutions to make data-driven decisions. And this episode is also sponsored by Vector Solutions, formerly Everfi, the trusted partner for 2,000 plus colleges and universities. Vector Solutions is a standard of care for student safety, well-being, and inclusion. So stay tuned to the end of the podcast for more information about these sponsors. So as I mentioned, I'm your host, Heather Shea, joining from the ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples, otherwise known as East Lansing, Michigan, and home to the campus of Michigan State University, where I work. This university resides on land ceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw, and as a land-grant institution, we feel like we have an even deeper responsibility to complicate and explore the relationship between our institution and the land. I am so excited about this episode today and so grateful for the four folks who have joined me to talk a little bit more and share their knowledge about autistic and neurodivergent students. And so I'm going to have each of you kind of share a little bit about yourselves and how your work intersects with this topic. And I'm going to start with John. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Heather. Hi, everyone. My name is John Caldora. I use he, him pronouns. I am a disability accommodations consultant with the Disability Resource Center at the University of Kentucky here in Lexington, Kentucky. Being a DRC consultant involves wearing many hats, but the hats that most relate to this episode are I coordinate our neurodiversity outreach efforts called the Neurodiverse Educational and Social Initiative, or NESSI, like the Loch Ness Monster. That's our mascot, the Loch Ness Monster.
I love it. That's great.
And I also am the primary accommodations consultant for our autistic college students. And last but definitely not least, I'm myself an autistic. So that's kind of what brought me into this space today.
Thank you so much for being here, John. I'm so grateful for your time. Lee, I should have started with you because you were the one who invited all of the rest of these folks. So thank you so much for bringing us together.
Oh, it is my pleasure. These are wonderful people that I love being with. So my name is Lee Burdett Williams, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am a longtime student affairs professional. Kind of grew up in the traditional sense of student activities to a dean of students role to a vice president's role. And then kind of took a sideways move that landed me here as the director of the College Autism Network, which is a nonprofit organization that supports training, research, and advocacy efforts focused on the experiences of autistic and other neurodivergent college students. We help connect campus-based and independent programs with one another. We help colleges and universities build their internal capacity for supporting autistic students through professional development. And we have a strong research focus that you'll hear about a bit today. And my three co-panelists, Emily, John, and Brett, are all active members of CAN, as we call the College Autism Network.
And we're going to post the link to your website in our show notes today, so we can make sure folks can access that and look at all of the amazing resources that you all provide. Thank you so much for being here and for bringing together this group. Brett, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Heather. Glad to be here. Glad to be with my colleagues and friends as well. It's nice to see everybody. My name is Brett Rainen-Nachman. I am he, him, his pronouns. I'm an assistant professor of adult and lifelong learning at the University of Arkansas. And I'm also director of research for the College Autism Network. So I've been part of the CAN leadership team for almost 6 years now. It's been a journey. It's hard to believe. And all of us were recently in Nashville for our College Autism Summit. So it's great to reconnect. And I am an autistic self-advocate. Much of my research focuses on autism in higher education, as well as disability more broadly. And it's really important to be able to shed light on the experiences of autistic college students and other stakeholders on campus who can help elevate and honor the experiences of autistic college students. So pleasure to be here today.
Thanks so much, Brett. It's great to have you here as well. Yes, you all were together. So this is like a part 2 to your time together last week. Emily, welcome.
Hi, I'm Emily Racklaw, she, her, hers. I'm the director of On Your Mark at Marquette University in the very cold Milwaukee, Wisconsin right now. Our program serves autistic and all forms of neurodivergent students who are enrolled at Marquette University. I'm also a licensed professional counselor and a certified rehabilitation counselor as of a week ago, and a former special education teacher and a vocational rehabilitation counselor. I'm also an ADHDer.
Awesome. So grateful for all of you bringing your experiences and wisdom and perspectives. So just a few months ago, I hosted a broader conversation about reframing disability. And so this episode kind of builds upon that topic. We'll link it in the show notes as well. But we're really looking at specifically delving into the research, training, and advocacy for students on the autism spectrum and other neurodivergent college students. So I think we should probably start where we often start, with some definitions. What is the language that we're using? And we know that that's always evolving. So Lee, can you define autism? Why is it a spectrum? And what does neurodivergent mean? And what's included in that umbrella term as well?
Sure. Yeah, that's a whole podcast in itself.
Yeah.
Let me give you the short version.
The Cliff Notes version, yes.
Right. One way to define autism is that it's a constellation of characteristics that are hardwired and brain-based that influence social, cognitive, and communication behaviors in particular ways. And we can talk about what some of those specific characteristics are, but I think those will come up through our conversation. And it's considered a spectrum because people demonstrate these characteristics in varying degrees. The term neurodivergent refers to an individual whose cognitive, learning, and social characteristics diverge from the majority of people, who are sometimes referred to as neurotypical. And so when we say that a community or organization is neurodiverse, or that neurodiversity is a value within that organization, what it means is that all sorts of learning and thinking approaches are represented, including those of neurodivergent and neurotypical people. Autism is one type of neurodivergence, but there are others. Emily mentioned ADHD. There are sort of varying degrees of varying definitions of neurodivergent, but it's really anybody who sort of diverges from what is considered kind of typical. I hope that sort of is a good Cliff Notes version.
Yeah.
People often say, people often confuse neurodiverse and neurodivergent and say a person is neurodiverse, but the way that we try to distinguish it is that communities or environments are neurodiverse, people are neurodivergent.
Gotcha. That makes more sense. So I'm really in recognizing that often, this is hidden, right? We don't necessarily know until a student discloses or shares their status as a student on the autism spectrum or neurodivergent. So when we think about defining, part of the complexity, I think, is the fact that it's not always evident when we engage. And we're going to unpack this in a lot of different ways today. But from your perspective, how do we better adjust our understanding so that we can be more inclusive when we talk about students with disabilities? Is it a disability? Is it included in that? And how should we be thinking about that in terms of inclusion?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and such an important issue that's being talked about a lot. Disability versus identity, what that means. So one thing that the way that I often think about it is there are plenty of people who would, if tested, right, like if evaluated, would meet the definition, the clinical definition or diagnosis of autism. And they live and they learn and they work and they have families and they function in really positive ways every day. And so that so that's not a disability, right? It's just a difference. Where I think it crosses the line into disability is when the characteristics of autism are an impediment to someone being able to pursue their dreams, their goals, or are disruptive to others who are trying to pursue their dreams or their goals. So on a college campus, we have plenty of students who would meet the definition of autism, and they don't get accommodations, or they have minimal accommodations, and they do fine, and maybe they're quirky, and maybe people know that something is unusual about them, but it's not a disabling set of characteristics. But if that student is unable to achieve what they are trying to achieve because of those characteristics, then it moves into the realm of disability. And then I think our focus really shifts to figuring out how to accommodate that student to help them be successful. I think, what the principles of design for learning are a really good place to start when we talk about this. If we can design learning experiences that reflect an assumption that everyone in the classroom or residence hall is neurotypical, then you're going to leave a lot of students behind, not just your autistic students. But if you adjust the environment to meet the needs of those students who have formal diagnoses of autism, you're actually going to improve the experience of everyone in the class, because you're creating the most universally supportive environment.
That's really powerful. I work in DEI spaces, and we often talk about centering the needs of our most marginalized students, and that then benefits everyone. That really resonates for me. Emily, I'm going to turn to you because I am really curious about if there's any data on how many students we're talking about on our college and university campuses. How has that population grown and changed over time as campuses have frankly addressed, services maybe more effectively? And then a little bit about their identities and how intersectionality also plays into some of their college experiences.
Yeah. So like Lee said, there's so many people on college campuses that either aren't registered with the Office of Disability Services or they haven't been tested that would qualify. So I feel like numbers are grossly underrepresented. So I'm not a researcher. Brett knows that I say that a lot. So the number is actually quite difficult to quantify. So when I started my program, the researchers who gave me the data said it was about for every 100 college student entering college was likely on the spectrum. And I don't really, again, I'll take corrections on that. And that was in 2019. Now, as we know, years have gone by and autism rates have increased based on diagnostic criteria and access to diagnoses. So I anticipate those numbers are actually going to start growing over time, not just because of these programs, but because we are people who exist and are turning 18 and are able to do college. So I guess that's a non-answer, but that's the answer to the question, to that part of the question. Yep. And in terms of intersectionality, I can speak for my program specifically. Right now, we're hovering at about 30% of our population that also identifies as LGBTQ+. And I suspect that's similar to other programs around the nation. And because of that, actually builds in additional layers of support, additional communities to belong to, and just kind of additional people who get it, that maybe are excluded from populations or excluded from activities or excluded from places. And from what I've seen from students as not being a member of either of those communities, is that it actually creates a bigger network and a bigger form of belonging that wouldn't maybe otherwise exist. And I think we're also seeing a shift. Brett is leading a research project called Project Pieces that I'm sure he'll talk about later, that I am blessed enough to be part of. We're really trying to identify people who are marginalized in the autistic community in terms of identities, whether that's LGBTQ+, race, ethnicity, income background, and we're hoping to kind of get a better idea of what it really looks like out there.
That's fascinating. I also have the opportunity to work in our LGBT services office on campus in the Gender and Sexuality Campus Center. And so I'm now thinking about like how that space really is as a space that maybe we should be spending a little bit more time considering the neurodivergent
Absolutely.
students. I love it.
Yes.
Thank you. You brought that for me. So John, we talked a bit about accommodations, and I am really interested in academic challenges and opportunities, right, that we see with autistic and neurodivergent students. Can you talk a little bit about what some of the biggest challenges are, and then what are some of the accommodations that either you provide at your campus or that generally are available for students to promote their success?
Sure. So something I'll just expand upon that Lee and Emily briefly touched on is, first of all, it is difficult in parts of the United States to get a diagnosis of autism. And we especially also see that there is a link where historically disenfranchised groups, just because of access to healthcare issues, also are experiencing that even more. So sometimes when students come to us, they will not have documentation of an autism diagnosis. Instead, they will have documentation of some other co-occurring disability. For example, depression, anxiety, combined with autism are very common. So we can start by giving them accommodations for depression, anxiety, which also covers a lot of what autism affects as well. So the issues vary a lot from student to student. I would say typically, though, if we're specifically looking at autism as a diagnosis, we see a lot of issues in the more social parts of a student's academic experience. So group projects, or being called on in class, or being able to present to a large group. And so, you know, usually when I'm meeting with a student who has a diagnosis of autism, I will, you know, go through those areas with them. Have you had any issues presenting in front of a group? If you're called on in class, does that produce a fight or flight response? As well as, you know, also addressing things like, okay, what happens if a student gets overstimulated? Because a lot of how autism impacts students is how they perceive the world around them. So if, you know, you're sitting in a room and you can hear the fluorescent lights buzzing and the professor is shouting into a microphone they don't need in a relatively small lecture hall, and you know, you have all of these different sensory inputs pushing on you, sometimes you need to be able to leave the classroom and make up any work that you missed while, you know, you take a minute and center yourself. So that's another accommodation that we see as well. I do think, you know, that autism does have strengths. A lot of our students do come in having done fairly well in high school or very well in high school. But then, you do run into that, what I'll call the high school to college cliff. There is a big gap in expectations. And so, students who might have developed all of these coping skills and resiliency skills, which were great in high school, they run into additional challenges here. So, we refer them to, we have integrated success coaches on our campus who serve as academic coaches as well, who can help them develop those skills. Another example is if they're registered with the Kentucky Office of Vocational Rehab, we have a partnership with them to provide that. And then another resource that students may want to consider is going to a college or university with a dedicated autism support program, whether it's a smaller one like here at UK that covers a few specific areas, or it's a more comprehensive program like On Your Mark at Marquette.
What would other folks add to what John shared? Thank you.
Yeah, when John mentioned that cliff, that was yes, that's exactly a lot of what we see, especially that first year of, oh, well, when I did this in high school, and I'm yeah, so about that, that's not going to work here. And just being shocked there, well, I had these coping skills. I'm okay, but it's a new environment, new challenges you're facing. Like John was saying, it's the classroom environments themselves and at universities is just very different than how they were in high school. So these coping mechanisms that worked well when they were with these groups of people theoretically that they've known for a very long time to now this giant group of people, they might not work.
Yeah.
It's also, there's a profound shift in philosophy because of the federal legislation that governs what's expected and the obligations of high schools and the obligations of college, right? And so in high school, the focus, coming out of the IDEA is really about success. What do we have to do to help the student be successful? And so high schools will go to tremendous lengths to help students be successful. Colleges are only obligated legally to provide access, not success, right? And so think about the students and the parents of those students who are coming out of that environment where everything has been about how to help my child or how to help me be successful. And now I'm on a college campus and you're saying that all you really have to do for me is provide me the kind of fair and equitable access to these opportunities. And then I'm on my own. And so, that idea of the cliff is really just crucial. And so we see a lot of students crash and burn in their first year because they are so unprepared for it. And we're not, they need a different runway than we have provided, but we have overpromised to many of them a level of support that we are not going to provide. And that's an admissions and enrollment issue that we could talk about at another time. But it's just really heartbreaking. And and as both Emily and John have said, students who would meet the clinical criteria for autism, if they've gotten to college, good on them. They have overcome a lot of challenges and they deserve our support and our kudos, because the world was not made for these students, and they have figured out what they've had to figure out to get this far.
And to kind of piggyback off of those points too, I think, and we can continue to, explore and interrogate the issue of so many folks who hold a lot of power and who are neurotypical, wielding their not necessarily wielding their influence to support autistic neurodivergent folks. So from the standpoint of a lot of the onus, as I think my colleagues have been alluding to, is put on the student to navigate these structures that, as Lee said, were not built for them. And consequently, I think it reinforces this paradigm, this messaging that of problem or challenge, when instead we really need to lean more into the strengths and opportunities. It sounds very foundational and trite even, but the use of language, I think, really makes a big difference. So when we're talking about, academic challenges, I think a lot of it is not necessarily by virtue of the student, who often is very capable and adept in a certain area of expertise. That's something we know in the autism community. There's strong hyper interests and areas in which folks really excel. But if the classes themselves are not designed in a manner to showcase that and to lean into variations and assignments where folks can channel that passion and knowledge in unique ways, then the student is compromised. And so and I imagine we'll shift into some of those practical solutions. But my real thinking is, per Lee's point, if folks, make it to like anybody, not just autistic students, but any students, if you meet the threshold to get into college, there's an opportunity, and it's consequently our opportunity as faculty, staff, practitioners, researchers to really figure out all the different channels to leverage those strengths and possibilities as much as we can.
I could not agree more. I feel like it's an opportunity, but it's our responsibility. We've admitted the student and said they can get in here. Do we not have a responsibility to address the structural, obstacles for their success at our institutional level, right? Yeah.
I think to build off of that, Heather, and what Brett said is also, a lot of these structural issues are large, but a lot of them are also, relatively smaller things that we can address. I regularly give a presentation to our staff and faculty about supporting neurodivergent students here at UK, and I tell them throughout the presentation, the advice I'm giving you doesn't just apply to our neurodivergent students, it applies to all of our students. Things such as giving context about and background about what we are teaching and about our policies and procedures, all the way to just communicating information through multiple methods and media. So a lot of it is stuff, that would benefit all of our students, not just our autistic or neurodivergent students.
Thank you so much. So let's move into emotional and social needs and supports that campuses can also provide in that regard. Leah, do you want to kick us off in that part?
Yeah, the social and emotional needs that neurodivergent or autistic students bring are really similar to the needs that neurotypical students bring to campus. They want to be respected and understood and acknowledged for the contributions that they can make to the community. Our students want to feel a sense of belonging. And so it always should force us to ask, what are we doing to help students, especially those who've been marginalized, feel like they belong and matter to our communities? Most autistic students want to make friends. They want to be successful and they want to be able to pursue their passions. How they go about seeking those things may look different from neurotypical approaches, and that's where a better understanding of common autistic characteristics is key. If someone in your community speaks a language different than the majority, you don't blame and ostracize them, right? You do two things. You learn to speak their language, and you encourage them to become more proficient in the majority language. And somewhere in between, communication improves and the community itself becomes more supportive of all types of diversity. I often make the distinction between what I call large A accommodations and small A accommodations. And the large A accommodations are like this sort of extended time on tests and distraction-free environment. And those are accommodations that a disability services office can put in place. But the small A accommodations are really about creating environments where the broadest group of people can succeed and feel that sense of belonging. So let's talk about orientation activities for a moment, because I think orientation is it's hell week for a lot of students who have sensory sensitivity. And I look back on my own career as being someone who was responsible for orientation programs. And really, I just want to cry because I feel like I was so insensitive, to ask students who have sensory sensitivity to be in loud places, boisterous places. Playfair, it's a great thing unless you have a sensitivity to noise or bright lights. The human knot really bad idea for anybody who does not feel comfortable being touched.
Yeah.
But we do these things all the time. And again, we're trying to meet the needs of the majority, the neurotypical, and all these neurodivergent students are standing on the sidelines saying, oh my God, like, what am I doing here? I've got to get out of here. This place is crazy. So, you know, how do we create environments that are supportive? You know, how do we create quiet spaces? How do we create smaller social opportunities so that these students have that runway, right, where they can really take their time getting comfortable in the ways that maybe in high school they took for granted.
Thank goodness COVID ended the human knot, at least on my campus.
Right. Goodbye. Good riddance to the human knot.
Didn't get rid of awkward, you know, those icebreakers that are awkward for everyone that no one likes.
Yeah.
No,
you
exactly.
love your neighbor, right? Like, yeah.
I always suggest do the name action alliteration one. I'm Jedi John. Simple. You learn my name, and it's something everyone can be comfortable with.
I'm gonna remember that forever now, John.
Jedi John.
Should I call you that the rest of the podcast?
Yeah.
I'm gonna do it.
Oh yeah.
I love it. I love it. What would other folks add about this social and emotional kind of the connectivity and the ability to find places and spaces of belonging? Like, I really like that component that you added, Lee.
Well, something I did in developing my program first is I included mental health support for my students, which I think is a huge piece because, as Lee was saying, navigating those social landscapes, navigating those really awkward, everybody meet everybody, how college that first 2 weeks is like summer camp, and just kind of having those supports built in. And then something else I did was really important is that I wanted my program to be part of the campus. So it wasn't just on the second floor of Coughlin Hall here at Marquette where we live, being fully integrated into campus by meeting with the president, meeting with provost, meeting with VPs, meeting with all the departments that we're going to have high touch with my students. So tutoring, writing center, obviously housing, even our police department, just in case, because apparently I'd like to do fire drills in the middle of the night and not tell me ahead of time so I can let my students know. So we can remember to check the stairwells because my students might be hiding there. But just so like everyone's aware of what can we do to make things more inclusive? What can we do to make it more welcoming? What's our real goal? Like Lee said about the foreign language, I'm thinking about international students or students who don't come from typical American culture, right? And how that's also a change. And the universities do a really good job of addressing that. So we should be considering what are we doing to level the playing field overall?
Yeah, I'm thinking about Google Translate and all of the language. Like that idea of translation is so powerful. And your point that you just made, Emily, about what we do for international students, absolutely spot on.
And that's sort of when we built the program here at UK, what we were addressing as well was we had a lot of supports already. We wanted to address specifically that sense of belonging. And so when we built Nessie, that is what we were programming to. We decided to go with a model that does not charge students additional fees because we wanted to make the barriers to access as low as possible. We also don't require a diagnosis to participate as well. But what we specifically program to is basically a survival skills guide for surviving a neurotypical college campus, excuse me, while also, you know, providing that space where students can hang out with one another and belong with one another and not have to worry about, you know, masking their autism or masking their neurodivergence, but give them a space where they can decompress and be themselves. And so that's kind of what that is where we decided to start here at UK with building that.
Also mentioned too, in terms of relating to the social needs, I think recognizing that, and this was talked about earlier in terms of folks wanting community and friends, and that may look in different ways among folks in the autistic community. I think really leaning into extracurriculars and campus organizations and other spaces can be really viable from the standpoint of providing a structure, often more deliberate way of engaging with peers who share the same passions, right? Like really focusing on the strengths and how to leverage them. Well, you know, if I love filmmaking and can participate in the filmmaking club and meet other people who share the same interest as me. As an autistic person, okay, there's a conversation piece, right? Likely we're going to find some points of connection, and maybe there would be divergence in terms of what ultimately is the best Disney movie of all time. Clearly, I may have my own opinions as the person
It's
with all the
Lion
Disney. Top five, Emily, top five for me. But as the person with all the Disney stuff in the background, but ultimately those extracurriculars are so vital in terms of creating those outlets for finding friends. For me, starting community college, it was all the extracurriculars that I wouldn't have ever anticipated being so prominent in my education, but ultimately served as the mechanism for making friends based on loving the environment or the news or student leadership or other things. So mind you, we have to recognize that not everybody in the autism community feels comfortable in certain social situations, and certain spaces may be sensory overload or intimidating or have certain nuances that are hard to make sense of. But I think we need to continue to think of how we also re-envision those outlets to create points of connection, collaboration, community, and it's hard to make friends in general. It's certainly harder to make friends as you get older, but those campus organizations and events can be viable avenues. And it doesn't require as much initiative on the student, especially if there's structured things unfolding in those spaces.
I'm going to talk one more time. So like as Brett was saying, I think one of our crucial partnerships was with Student Life. Those student organizations have been awesome. We have an event most Wednesdays, but Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights called Late Night Marquette that has activities for students to do from like 9 p.m. to like way past my bedtime. And what we did, like partnering with them and saying, okay, how are you advertising? They were like, oh, it's trivia. Okay, but what's the topic? What's to be expected? And kind of making sure that all those avenues, especially like those communities that are supposed to be naturally important communities on campuses, are also accessible.
I love the student involvement push. That is my kind of engaged college students, and their connections are the ways that we can find those places of belonging. And so thank you for that. I think the social and emotional piece is really key. I'm really curious about the research and all of the recent studies. And Emily, you kind of alluded to a project you're working on with Brett. Brett, can you provide some overview, and then anything that we can reference in our links today, which will be useful tools for our college and university partners to use to inform their work?
Absolutely. Well, bottom line, the research is emergent. It's minimal. So when I started grad school 7 years ago, there were only a handful of journal articles that really focused on autistic college students or autism in higher education. And that's really a reflection of, until the past decade, we weren't recognizing the prominence of autistic college students on our campuses by virtue, at the time, not as many programs existing, and certainly the autism support programs that John and Emily were referring to, we're seeing many more of them now, and so consequently, there's a more visible presence on our campuses for autistic college students. But what the research had told us at the time is, well, if you were looking at any studies from 10 years ago or so, you wouldn't see many participants being autistic college students. It would be a lot of communicating about, right? So parents' perspectives, maybe staff or faculty perspectives, administrative perspectives, focusing on the high schoolers intending to go to college and those transitions, and all of that having value, no doubt. And we need to have a holistic picture of these various perspectives. But without the autistic college student perspective being elevated in the research, it really inhibits our full understanding of we're talking about the academic, emotional, social challenges and opportunities. Well, who better to learn about it than from the autistic college students themselves? And gradually we're seeing more of that. We're seeing more of a focus on not just the academic part that gets a lot of attention and the accommodations and relationships with disability services. We need to attend to that, of course, but it's also, as I mentioned, more of that holistic, right? How are students making friends on college campuses? In what ways are they able to find majors that capitalize on their interests? What are their employment pathways? in what ways are their college experiences setting them up for that? Or gradually, we're seeing more research that is more holistic in nature, but another challenge too, and this was discussed briefly earlier, but we're not really always attending to the intersectionality of autistic college students, folks who identify as women and non-binary, people of color, international students, low-income students, LGBTQ+. And we know there's a lot of, as Emily talked about earlier with their program, the prominence of autistic LGBTQ folks. And so that's been unfortunate that a lot of the research has not been able to unveil that, and that's not always by virtue of the researcher not trying, but trying to gather those perspectives, but certain structures and experiences limiting those opportunities from unfolding. And so the kind of the space that I've entered in here is over recent years with my work, it's been one to outline what research does exist, what's the landscape, but also to produce empirical work that really elevates autistic college students' perspectives. My dissertation was on that, and I'm starting to produce some journal articles related to that are intended to serve a variety of different stakeholders. And so really excited and proud of that, but also making it much larger scale. So Emily referred to Project PIECES, which it's an acronym that stands for Post-Secondary Education, Autistic College Students' Experiences of Success, because we see like all of us are connected to autistic college students in a variety of ways, but how do they define success, right? As higher education folks, we might view success in traditional ways, right? Are you graduating in a quote unquote reasonable amount of time? Are you getting good grades? But it's, we know for all students, it's a lot more than that, right? It's, are you able to make friends? Are you taking care of your wellness and mental health? Are you participating in activities? Are you feeling a sense of pride in yourself, in your identities, in your intersectional identities outside of and in concert with autism? Are you finding a job? Are you connecting with folks? So what we've designed is a survey that is kind of a nationwide survey. It's for undergraduate autistic college students. Eventually, over time, we'd like to expand it. And it's really vast in trying to really enable them to define what is success for you, what factors contribute to success, in what ways could colleges be redesigned in ways that really favor the different skills and opportunities that you bring to the table. And we're really hoping to continue to gather more insights on that. And this will be a longitudinal survey where we'll follow students over the years as well. But all that to say, with the research, the landscape is expanding. Thankfully, there are more folks in this space. There are more autistic researchers in this space. Not as many that I've seen quite in the United States, just among the circles that I occupy, a lot of folks overseas as well, who are producing great work. And I am seeing in just the past year or two, a lot more folks who are autistic scholars. Not all of them are from higher ed programs or backgrounds like me, but from other fields, who are lending really valuable insights into what autism looks like across different disciplines, across other identities, and most importantly, really recognizing that we have an important, this is an important time for us to use our platforms and our spaces for good, and to work in concert with our neurotypical colleagues to produce work that is holistic, that is strengths-based in nature, that changes the paradigm, and ultimately is pragmatic, right? I could produce a lot of different research studies, but if it wasn't aimed to actually be implemented, if we're not communicating with our practitioner colleagues, then it's all for naught, right? We're just talking in silos. A lot of the work that I've seen and that I've engaged with, it's not always in higher ed circles, right? It's autistic folks and autistic scholarship being produced for autism journals, disability journals, other disciplines as well. That all has merit. I've contributed to those spaces as well. What we need to do more of is publishing in higher ed and student affairs journals. And that's where, from a disciplinary standpoint, that's where I'm biased, and I want to be, and I am in those spaces where we really need to be communicating with the practitioners at our colleges and universities, so they know what tools they can implement, because otherwise we're we're talking in circles. We need to be communicating across different spaces. And that's what I really valued with what Emily was talking about a few minutes ago in terms of their program working with student life and really making sure that these are collaborative relationships. Change doesn't happen in a silo, it happens across a network. So, and all of this research extends to College Autism Network, and we produce monthly webinars where we have presenters talking about their research. We have a listserv where over the past 5 years, we've built more than 600 people on our College Autism Network Virtual Association Scholars listserv, which I've been very proud of, and it allows folks to share word about their research studies, get participants, get insights, share scholarship. It's a burgeoning space. It's a space that totally thrills me, and more importantly, where we collectively are the pioneers. We are going to change the conversation about autism in higher education. So let's do the good work. Yes, there's the cheer from Lee.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
When we started the College Autism Summit, this was our 6th one. One of the key goals was giving space for practitioners and researchers to talk to one another and really influence each other's work, because that wasn't happening. But here's the thing: I think this is really important to understand, kind of contextually, why we're so excited about Project Pieces, and it's because, as Brett said, the research has been kind of piecemeal. As the autism awareness movement has really caught on, there's a lot more interest among graduate students in doing a research project or a thesis or dissertation around an autistic population. So what happens is, about once a week, I get a request. Someone has found me through CAN. I get a request from someone who says, I'm a master's student or I'm a doctoral student, and I'm doing my dissertation on autistic student success in college. And I wonder, I need to interview autistic students. Can you send out this invitation to participate in my survey or do one of my interviews? Now, I could put this invitation on the listserv, and then Emily and John and about 140 other people will get this invitation. Another researcher wants to interview my autistic students. Yeah. Now it's added to my workload because I've got to recruit them. And honestly, they don't want to do it because they've got other things. They're sick of talking about being autistic, and and I mean, these requests are, they're sincere, they're important, but they are, it's a flood, right? And so, what I tell these researchers is, well, if you can incentivize it with like a gift card or payment, you might be able to get this, get a critical mass. But the problem is, until they get a critical mass, you can't get this research funded. The N isn't big enough, the sample size isn't big enough. So Project Pieces is really about trying to create a critical mass as a database, something like an IPEDS or like the leadership study database, where you have thousands of people already in the database. And then those researchers can tap that database to get a lot of really useful information and not go through this. I'm a researcher, I need people to interview. Could you ask the program directors so they could ask their students? Because that gets old, as Emily and John, I'm sure, can tell you.
It really does.
Stop asking me, Lee. Right. So I don't send them on anymore. Oh, I feel bad.
Yeah, I'll just add too, because I appreciate you mentioning that, Lee, in terms of what the hopes are of Project Pieces. We want to create something that is, broadly accessible, so that folks can glean on these insights, so that we're able to track some students from year to year, so we know what their pathways are. That's a big challenge in the community college world that I'm also engaged with, is we don't always know students' pathways from community college and thereafter. So this will hopefully illuminate those trajectories as well. And I'll continue to say, like, I mean, I'm one of those researchers too, where I am tapping people and asking for, like, can you participate, spread the word. There's value in that. There's merit, particularly based on the nuances of particular inquiries that cannot necessarily always be addressed in broad context, but that is the goal with Project Pieces, because it is very encompassing of a variety of different domains that it will enable a lot of researchers to be able to tap into that. But it's going to take time in building that infrastructure. So we're at the nascence of it. We've got national funding. We are offering $25 gift cards to eligible participants, and we're very excited about, and also really proud that it's a team consisting of researchers, practitioners, and self-advocates. So it's been very much where we're relying on each other's strengths and unique perspectives across different disciplines too. So that's the promotional piece that I'll conclude at this juncture. But we feel the research landscape is changing. It's happening very rapidly, and ultimately it just comes down to getting in the hands of folks who need and should check out this work, because until you have that exposure, there's never going to be acceptance. So we need to lean into that more.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I'm so grateful for you sharing that overview, because I think this is the piece, right? Like, we need to be able to give, no pun intended. This is the piece that we need to be able to give practitioners and faculty and graduate students, and improving their kind of broad understanding. I want to turn, before we get to that question about what advice we would give, I do want to ask a bit about self-advocacy, because we mentioned that a couple of times. And I think about college students in general, right? Like, understanding leaving home, missing supportive parents and guardians, and then maybe being at greater risk of being intentionally harmed. So how can we promote that self-advocacy and help-seeking behaviors among autistic and neurodivergent students? So John, I'm going to have you kick us off on that one.
Sure. So first of all, recommendation for the audience to review the journal article Test et al.'s Framework of Self-Advocacy for Students with Disabilities. Very good overview of sort of this laddered level of how do you become a self-advocate through college, because college is really that last big safety net where you have people like student affairs professionals who are there to look out for you and support you. Now, we can build out that safety net a bit more with neurodiversity friendly employers. CAN really does a lot of good work with that. But ultimately, it's important, to explain to students, and sometimes also you have to explain to their parents, that you are at the end of that point where you will have these supports. And so you need to be able to advocate for yourself in your field with your employers in your daily life. And so that's why, I push that. But I think also, there is also a need to develop help-seeking behavior. I am an autistic person who went through college and now runs an autism support program. And so there are more and more of us. And one of the areas that we're realizing, we have to take another look at is how we educate about developing interpersonal relationships and interpersonal romantic relationships, because we have to move from, we've moved over the past couple of years from like a compliance model, like a don't do this to not commit a Title IX violation, to more of a bystander intervention model. But, as the emerging research is showing, we need to move past that towards also a more affirming model, because we have a lot of survivors of sexual misconduct and sexual violence who are autistic or members of the autism spectrum, particularly among historically marginalized identities, which we also, need to work into that as well. So I think that, if you ask what keeps me up at night, it's that. The other thing that keeps me up at night is those co-occurring disabilities, a lot of which are mental health based. So we do have, students who may have used up a lot more resiliency skills and a lot more of that resiliency bandwidth than other students who may find themselves in crisis more. And that's where it's important, not just to build that community of students, but also build supports for those students. Our autism support program didn't actually start in our disability resource center. It started in our case management office, because we were noticing that we were seeing quite a few of our autistic students who were coming in and experiencing mental health crises that we then do postvention for and try to support them, but they were missing that sense of belonging. And so that's kind of where that started. And when I moved over into disability services, I kind of brought it over with me because we have funding that we can actually devote to students with disabilities that's earmarked for that. But that's one of the reasons why we started this program. But I think overall, just keeping an extra eye on these students is really, if I can give you, one thing you can do to promote this today is just check in more with these students and check in with how they're doing.
That's really powerful. Brett, what would you add?
Yeah, I would offer lots of snaps to what John said. And I think it's an iterative process. Self-advocacy, if you're looking at it from the student lens, it does not necessarily happen overnight. And I think that requires practitioners across all different parts of the campus to recognize that folks' entry points in terms of not only embracing their autism identity and experience, but also being able to find ways to attain the needs that they have, attain the supports that they need to be successful. It takes time. I know for myself it did too. And I think everybody's journey is different. I kind of chuckled a little bit when John mentioned the Test at All article, because I use that as the theoretical framework for a journal article that will be debuting very shortly in the Journal of First Year Experience in Students in Transition. It's on self-advocacy. It's a piece of my dissertation. So I feel very tethered to that, and really recognizing that there's a lot of different stages that students go through, and consequently, there are a variety of different considerations that practitioners should have, including the notion of navigating those relationships with parents who are often very well-intentioned, if assuming they're involved in their children's lives, but perhaps overstep boundaries or aren't sure of in what ways they can engage or communicate. And unfortunately, that positions a lot more effort or work prior to students' college years to be able to learn how to advocate for themselves by the time they get to college, right? And this applies to not just autistic college students, but think of first-year students and how there's a lot of uncertainty and not knowing how to navigate things. And it's not necessarily about pointing blame. It's more of trying to figure out mechanisms so that students feel more self-assured about themselves, whatever identities they hold, autism or not, but figuring out how to ask for help, knowing that it's okay to ask for help. What it comes down to is that self-recognition and being able to figure out the right mechanism to be able to get supports. Collaborative problem solving is a tool that a lot of autism support programs utilize and is incorporated in other spaces. It's all about figuring out how to navigate things with the student. It gives them a sense of agency in the process. I think certainly in terms of self-advocacy, it comes down to students being aware of different avenues they can engage with to learn about their autism identity if they're interested in that, right? So there's the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, which has very huge reach in our autism community, and being patient with oneself that, for me, autism is salient because it defines me personally and a heck of a lot professionally too. But that didn't happen overnight. It wasn't until the end of my community college experience that I was open about my autism, and then actively explored that, and then channeled into my research in grad school. For a lot of folks, their trajectories may be vastly different depending on diagnoses and other identities, and how stigma may play a role. So self-advocacy is something that I think we need to elevate more broadly on our college campuses to support all of our students. And when it comes to autistic students who may have perhaps need an additional layer of support in terms of having a guide to know where certain places are on campus, or to have someone provide an introduction, because maybe I feel a little anxious in new situations, but maybe figuring out phrases or tools that I can turn to that are a little bit more comfortable. It's a whole wide assortment of different components that we need to be accounting for. So I realize I'm perhaps a bit verbose here, but I want to illustrate that the onus falls on the student to advocate for themselves, but it shouldn't be where it's just on them. It's a whole network of different supports to be able to honor that experience.
That was great. That was absolutely fabulous. And I consider this, I mean, I do think that this is an example of something that resonates. I have a 17-year-old who's getting ready to go to college. And like, as you were saying that, I was like, oh my gosh, am I building the skills that they need to be able to advocate for themselves? And I work in this field, right? Like, that's the other part of this. Oh. So I would love to finish with advice and some resources or other kinds of things we should be kind of thinking about. And Lee, you mentioned is it Netflix or Amazon or show that we should all be watching as we were thinking about this conversation earlier? So tell us a little bit about advice to give to practitioners, faculty, grad students, etc.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting that over the last few years, the number of sort of coded or obviously autistic characters have emerged on TV, and they've kind of come from being supporting roles to being center. So at the College Autism Summit last week, our closing speaker was the creator, Jason Katims, and the cast of the Amazon series, As We See It. And it's a really terrific show. It's one season, 8 episodes. Maybe there'll be a second season. I don't know. But a great bit of homework for anybody who wants to just kind of learn what some of the challenges are that are faced by autistic young adults. Watch these 8 episodes and you will learn a lot. The actors themselves are autistic, and it was really just an honor to hear from them about how they kind of made sense of being autistic and playing someone who's autistic and kind of reconciling those characteristics. But, more broadly, my advice is and I think what gives me some hope is just that, student affairs, we have always led higher education in areas of diversity and inclusion, right? So from supporting women in higher ed, BIPOC students, LGBTQ students, it's always been student affairs at the helm, leading our institutions. And we can do that with neurodiversity too. So I can't stress enough the importance of outreach and training and education to create a truly autism-friendly campus environment. So one resource that I like to pitch is our CAN Consultants Collective, a group of people, these 3 are among them, who are available to work with campuses to help do training and for faculty, staff, and students, because it's a vulnerable population, as Brett said, and we have to figure out how to meet autistic students more than halfway. And we do that through really understanding autism, what it looks like, what it is, what it isn't, and what sorts of interactions are the most effective. So you can find more about the Consultants Collective on our website. I'll stop there.
I love it. I love it. We are out of time, and I'd love to hear in our final thoughts from each of you any other resources that you would want to share, and then any particular thoughts that you have. This episode, our podcast is called Student Affairs Now. So what are you thinking, pondering, questioning, excited about, troubling now? And then if you would like to share how people can connect with you, that would be great too. So Lee, I'll have you kick us off for the final thoughts and then move on to the rest of you.
I think on a lot of campuses, so there's about 120 sort of formally designated autism support programs that are campus-based. Sometimes they have good connections with student affairs. Sometimes they're very isolated from student affairs. Those are critical partnerships. So if you have a program like that on your campus, reach out to them and say, how can we partner to really support all of our students, really create a neurodiverse environment? And I think if you don't have one of those programs, that's okay. You still have people who want to learn. You have a lot of people with personal experience with autism, and start creating a training initiative on your campus. do webinars, bring in a consultant, do a book group, do a TV watching group. Student affairs, we're good at this. Like, we do this really well, and we just need to do it with these students in mind.
Thank you so much, Lee. Brett, tell us a bit about what your final thoughts are as you're kind of thinking about this episode today.
Yeah, I think the thought that continues to resonate in my mind is the notion of collaboration and where we are communicating with one another about these issues. I often say in my work that I feel a very deep sense of responsibility to my community, to my work, to be able to illuminate new perspectives, to work with folks who have complementary areas of expertise so that the autistic college student experience is more prominent in our minds. But ultimately, this is everyone's responsibility. It's not just those of us whose work is deeply connected to autism. And that's why I really always appreciate, like what Lee said earlier and what all of us were communicating about, is that the strategies that we may employ that are useful for our autistic neurodivergent college students are going to be effective often for everybody. There's going to be further nuances and things to attend to with the autism community. But if we look at it from a more holistic and representative standpoint, I think that can be very helpful. I would say I want the takeaway to be that likely, student affairs practitioners are very adept in being just resourceful and making connections and drawing on their tools and expertise to be able to provide good experiences for students. And I think we need to lean into that further in thinking across campus spaces, working with autism programs should they exist. If they don't exist, working with disability service offices, but also creating events and opportunities for autistic students to be elevated more saliently on a college campus, right? A panel, right? We don't want to create things that are tokenist or ways that further marginalize or don't honor the experiences, but we need to work in collaboration with our autistic campus partners, students, faculty, if there are any out autistic faculty on your campus, like and if they're interested in being able to share their experiences, I think that's something to lean into. Same with our practitioner colleagues. I think that's I tend to be long-winded, but that's all I'll say for now. Feel free to connect with me. My email is bnachman@uark.edu. I'm still trying to figure out my email. It's relatively new. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's bnachman reports. And definitely follow all of us at College Autism Network. We'd love to engage with you in a variety of different ways.
I love it.
And participate in our study, please. Project Pieces. Look at the show notes for more information.
For sure. Emily, what are your final thoughts? What would you like to leave folks with?
Okay, so personally, my brain makes it about me. And I was thinking, so the students that are in my program, I know that they're having a good experience on campus, but also my program is not compulsory if you're autistic or neurodivergent. So what am I doing from imagining I have a campus that doesn't have a program? So what am I doing to ensure that those partnerships, that just because they're cool with me and the students on the list or whatever, is it actually happening is it happening across campus? And I think for me, like, that's my next step, and thinking from that perspective for people whose campuses don't have programs, what are you doing? Because students are there, whether you have a program or not, they're autistic and neurodivergent students on your campus. What are you doing to make sure that they're having an amazing experience, just like all the other students on your campus? Oh, and you can find me on LinkedIn, Emily Racklaw.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a great summary, because I do think it is everybody's responsibility. John, it's your last. Yep. What would you like to leave us with?
I think just first and foremost, students need to be at the center of this conversation. We describe our program as staff-led but student-directed. We discuss what students want to learn about, and that is what we program towards. And so we make sure, that the students definitely have a voice in how our program operates, how it expands. And I think, whatever you are doing on your campus, you need to talk to your students first, because they are the ones that are going to know what your individual campus needs are. If you want to get a hold of me, you can reach me at john.caldora@uky.edu or via Twitter. I'm at John Caldora, or through the CAN Consultants Collective that Lee mentioned earlier.
Awesome. I am so grateful to all of you for your time today. Thank you so much for sharing your contributions to the conversation and to Student Affairs Now. Also sending heartfelt appreciation to our dedicated behind the scenes producer, Nat Ambrosi. Thanks, Nat, for making us look and sound amazing. If you are listening today and you're not already receiving our weekly newsletter, please visit our website at studentaffairsnow.com. Scroll to the bottom of the homepage and add your name to our MailChimp list. And while you're there, you can check out our archives. If you found this conversation to be helpful, please share on social media with your colleagues or students if you're a faculty member, and subscribe. It really helps us build these conversations and reach more folks. So thanks again also to our sponsors. So our first sponsor is Vector Solutions, formerly Everfi. How will your institution rise to reach today's socially conscious generation? These students report commitments to safety, well-being, and inclusion as important as academic rigor when selecting a college. And it's time to reimagine the work of student affairs as an investment, not an expense. For over 20 years, Vector Solutions, which now includes the Campus Prevention Network, or formerly Everfi, has been the partner of choice for 2,000 plus colleges, universities, and national organizations. With 9 efficacy studies behind our courses, you can trust and have full confidence that you are using the standard of care for student safety, well-being, and inclusion. Transform the future of your institution and community you serve. Learn more at vectorsolutions.com/studentaffairsnow. Our second sponsor for today is Simplicity. Simplicity is the global leader in student services technology platforms with state-of-the-art technology that empowers institutions to make data-driven decisions specific to their goals. A true partner to the institution, Simplicity supports all aspects of student life, including, but not limited to, career services and development, student conduct and well-being, student success, and accessibility services. To learn more, visit simplicity.com or connect with them on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. If you could take a moment and visit our website and click on sponsors link to learn more, that would be amazing. Again, I'm Heather Shea. Thanks to all of our listeners and everybody who is watching and listening. Make it a great week, everyone.